I'm Alan Rudolph, the Vice President for Research, and our office sponsors this event, Leadership and Innovation, in cooperation with our colleagues in Advancement. So Kim Tobin, my counterpart in Advancement. So we're really pleased to have these series, and so pleased that we have a great turnout tonight, and we're really glad to invite Tracy Embry here. And I'd like to give you a short intro for Tracy, who's from Cummings. But I'd probably start with telling you a little bit about Cummings and the rich relationship that we've had with Cummings for almost 15 or 20 years now. And it's most evident if you're ever out at the powerhouse. I know some of you are. You'll see some Cummings equipment out there, and certainly the work that's been done in the engines lab here at CSU and its evolution into that powerhouse campus is in part because of the partnerships we've developed with great companies like Cummings. For the many students in the audience, you'd be interested to know that there are 32 students who are currently employed by Cummings, so you might be even more incentive to stick around after the talk and talk to Tracy. But it's clearly also been a path for our students to find really exciting employment and innovative ways to express their degrees gained here at CSU. And in fact, we've had Cummings employees come back to CSU. We just met one at the reception here. Cummings also has a really outstanding record in diversity and sort of looking at human resource practices and being innovative around inclusivity and team building, and have won a number of awards in that arena with regard to their innovative practices around diversity. And our speaker as well, I think if you get to know her, and she's got a nice page up here of 10 Tracy truths. So there's a sheet up here we'll pass around, or you can come up and get. And in this, I think it's a great way to get to know our speaker in a way that you'll probably be enriched after she speaks. But one of the things she speaks about is her passion for creating affinity groups around women and other inclusive groups and bringing them in. I think that's been a part of some of the innovative practices that Cummings has enjoyed and been recognized for. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Tracy Embry and then let her give us her talk, and we'll have some time for some discussion and questions after. We'll come up and moderate that too. Tracy's currently the president of the Cummings Component Group and vice president at Cummings. She's been at Cummings since 2000. I think Procter & Gamble was her other close? That's okay. What did I Colgate. Yeah, sorry. I goofed it up already. But she's been at Cummings since 2000, worked in many different areas within Cummings. I won't go through all the areas that she's worked in, because I imagine she might refer to them in her talk. By background, she's a bachelor's in Chem E from MIT and an MBA from Harvard. And she's been through executive leadership programs at Cummings as part of her interest in really leading teams and passionate about leading teams. And one of the things that I think is exciting when we invite people from industry in the series in is to see how the synergies with what we're trying to do here and some of the team building and interdisciplinary energy that we can bring to doing research and development. So it's always great to see how others in other sectors are bringing similar kinds of concepts and team building forward and how to drive innovation in new ways. So with that, I'll introduce Tracy Embry.
Thank you. I'm going to move this out of the way because I'll probably hit it. I'm a hand talker. So thank you all for having me here. This has been a really exciting day. So when Robin told me we had this opportunity to come and do this leadership and innovation conversation, my first question to him was, I said, "Are you sure I'm the right person to do this?" You know, because we've got a lot of technical partnerships here with CSU, and I said, you know, I'm not the person to go and do a design review of our technology. Well, I have an engineering degree. I am not the appropriate person to do that. And he said, no, it's fine. And I said, okay, how about I talk about leadership and innovation and values and what that's meant for our company throughout our long, rich history. Because we are a technical company. We make things, we make big things. We have a lot of engineers, and we have to make some difficult choices. So I'm going to kind of describe some of that for you guys today, so you can get a flavor for what it's like if you're a company that has a really strong value set, but often has to make some difficult choices along the way. And at the same time, you're working hard to innovate and drive technology forward and advance the world in that way. So, you guys can grade me at the end, okay? So now let me just tell you a little bit about Cummins. We're a pretty big company. We weren't this big when I started, obviously. So we've got 55,000 employees all around the world. Just last week, I was in India opening up a new components plant, which is really cool. And then, I'll be going to Europe in about, when I get back from vacation, to go meet with some customers. And then I was supposed to go to China in January, but I decided I wasn't. But that's kind of like my life. Once a month, I get to go somewhere different because I've got employees all around the world. We are almost 100 years old. In 2 years, we will celebrate the 100th year of our company, it's going to be a pretty big party in Columbus, Indiana. I can tell you that much. We're already starting the planning now. And we are about in the last couple of years, we've been between $17 to $19 billion in sales. When I started at the company 17 years ago, we were $6 billion in sales. The business that I run today is about $5 billion. And I have these moments where I think, oh my gosh, when I started at the company, the entirety of Cummins was as big as the part I'm running right now, which is kind of a really weird, strange, scary thing to think about. But the interesting thing is, as we've grown, there have been a lot of decisions and choices we've had to make. So these are the different applications that our products go on. I didn't know what Cummins did when I was interviewing. I knew when I was interviewing, but when I was thinking about coming to work at Cummins, I didn't know what Cummins did. But there's a couple of cool things that we power that you might not be aware of. So how many of you knew that we provide backup power for the Statue of Liberty? We do. Did somebody actually know that? Was there a hand? Awesome. I was like, yes. Do any of you guys, have you ever seen Deadliest Catch? Yeah. So we have the engine on the Time Bandit. So that's a Cummins engine. In fact, the guys that are on that boat have visited our office a couple of times. And then who knows the Chicago Cubs? Yeah. So Wrigley Field was redone in 2016. And when they did Wrigley Field again, they chose Cummins to provide backup power generation for Wrigley Field. So, we were there in case the Cubs needed us. Clearly they didn't. But those are the types of places that you'll see Cummins, in addition to maybe some of those things that you see on the screen. And this is, as a structural perspective, we have 4 main operating business units. We make engines. We have power systems, which are big, high horsepower, big engines. Engines that are as big as this room, bigger than this room, maybe even now. And generator sets, power generation sets that go around those engines. Then the components business, that's the one that I lead. Right now, we manufacture and sell engine components. So things like turbochargers or fuel systems, filtration products, control systems, after-treatment systems. Those are the things that make up our components division. And then distribution is the arm where we service and support all of those products that we sell around the world. So, we've got this series of kind of complementary businesses that work together. And this idea of collaboration and working across the company is a big part of our strategy. And so those operating segments are intended to be complementary. And like I mentioned earlier, we're coming up on 100 years. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story about how we started and then what that has meant as we go forward. So in a way, you can think about Cummins, obviously, we were quite entrepreneurial when we started. So the picture, let me see. Oh, it's not going to show. Okay. So the 2 gentlemen there that you see, those are the 2 that started the company. So there was a guy named Clessie Cummins. That's where our name came from. And Clessie was a driver. He was a mechanic. He was an inventor. And he worked for this guy named W.G. Irwin. And he convinced his boss to give him venture capital money so he could go get this engine, this diesel engine, from a company in Germany called MAN that was made by this guy called Rudolf Diesel. So Clessy believed that he can bring this engine into the United States. And his boss, Mr. Irwin, thought, well, this is a pretty good idea. He was a local entrepreneur. He ran a general store in Columbus. He ran a bank. And he thought, okay, this could be a good business opportunity, could be good for the community. Let's give it a go. And so he funded him. But the problem was this: all of the trucks running around the country at that time, they already had engines. They had gasoline engines, and those gasoline engines worked perfectly fine. So there was really no motivation for people to switch out. And even though the diesel product actually gave them better fuel efficiency, and it was a more durable product. So what Clessy did? He got on this bus right there and decided that he was going to barnstorm across the country. And so he drove from New York to Los Angeles in that bus. And he did it without breaking down. And he only spent $11.22 on fuel. That was how he convinced people that the diesel engine had a future. It took Cummins 20 years to make a profit. It wasn't until the 1930s that the company actually started to make money. So very similar to a lot of startups that you hear about today. Oh, by the way, just as an aside, this brick building right here, that's the original Cummins headquarters building, and it's still there today. It actually houses our employee cafeteria at our headquarters building. So I want to also share a little bit about another really important leader in our company. And this is really where Cummins got really the idea of values as a key part of the fabric of our company. And so I want to tell you about J. Irwin Miller, or really he's the Mr. Miller that we all refer to. So he was quite a visionary man. He was a pioneer in the business world for a couple of reasons. So he was related to W.G. Irwin, that guy I mentioned earlier, who funded Clessy's idea. So he was W.G. Irwin's great nephew. So we've got this family connection. And Mr. Miller started his career at Cummins around 1934. And he was in the company as a general manager, but he kind of had an interesting background. He was educated, he had been to Oxford, he studied religion and theology and philosophy, and that was a little bit different than what most businessmen in that time had studied. And he also had served our country in the US Navy, and as a result of his experience in World War II, he had some ideas about things that the business world could do differently. And he had a strong belief that businesses are only as strong as the communities where they are located. That was his core belief, and that still continues today. And so he decided that everything that we did as a company would make sure that the communities around us became successful and sustainable. And he had some words to say that before I flip to the next slide, I just want to read this to you. I want you to just kind of listen to these words. He said this. He said that in search for character and commitment, we must rid ourselves of our inherited, even cherished biases and prejudices. Character, ability, and intelligence are not concentrated on one sex over the other, nor in persons of certain ascents or in certain races, or in persons holding degrees from universities over others. When we indulge ourselves in such irrational prejudices, we damage ourselves most of all, and ultimately assure ourselves of failure in competition with those who are more open and less biased. While some still argue that business has no social responsibility, we believe that our survival in the long run is as dependent upon responsible citizenship in our communities and in the society as it is on responsible technological, financial, and production performance. So he said these things in 1972. 1972. And we often in our company think about those words, and those words are what form the basis of our company's core values. So Mr. Miller, he had such a strong belief in ethics, integrity, in diversity that led to some revolutionary approaches to how we conducted business. He was the first layperson to serve on the National Council of Churches, and that helped drive religious institutions across the country to support civil rights. And he did this. What's outstanding about this is the fact he did this while he was serving as the CEO of Cummins. It's very rare that you would see somebody in that position take that stance. And because of that, Dr. King called him the most socially responsible businessman in the country. So Mr. Miller retired in 1977, and he passed away in 2004, and he still remains a very critical person in the history of our company. And the leadership team at Cummins, which I'm a member of, we believe this is our job, to continue to find ways to live our values, to continue to drive the company to perform in a way that Mr. Miller would have wanted us to. And that drives a lot of our innovation, and it drives a lot of our thinking. Now, we're a public company. So as a result of being a public company, we have shareholders that we have to satisfy. So sometimes there are conflicts. But the thing about Cummins that's interesting is because of those words that Mr. Miller said, we actually believe in a stakeholder model, not just a shareholder model. And what we mean by that is, yes, shareholders must be satisfied, but we also think creating wealth for communities, for employees, for customers, for suppliers are just as important as creating wealth for shareholders. And that came from those words that Mr. Miller talked about. So I want to show you some things related to our values before I talk about some case studies I want to share. So we have something called a vision and a mission at Cummins, and that's what you see on the screen. So the vision really defines, who we want to be as a company. And, for us, we want to be a company that makes people's lives better by unleashing the power of Cummins, right? We believe that we can serve our stakeholders in a way that helps all of them be better. Now, the mission is really about pathways to achieve the vision. And so let me just pick one, demanding that everything we do leads to a cleaner, healthier, safer environment. So we were very intentional when we chose these words. So think about that word demanding. That's a pretty strong word. And it's true because demand is all about our expectation as a company that strategic and operating decisions that we make at all levels should do these things, be cleaner decisions, healthier decisions, safer environment. And I'll talk to you about how this statement played out. But demand is our expectation. And so that might be a little bit different than what you'd expect from a company that makes engines, right? It's kind of, I've had people say, well, how do you do that if you make engines? We started as a company that made engines, but our job is to make them cleaner and better and safer every time we put a new product out there. Values. So I've talked about values. These are the core values of our company. And what's really interesting about these is, the first is we've actually had them formally written down since about 2000. When I joined the company, I remember joining and we were training everybody on these values. And our company was going through kind of a transition. We were going through what we called at that time a transition from a best efforts company, one where everybody worked their hardest and tried their best, to one that was really rooted in a performance ethic of accountability, people that say we do what we say we're going to do. And we believe that transformation was really important for our company. So we wrote down the values that were important for us as we made this transformation. And we started to talk to people about what that means as you're making decisions. And we actually, I will say, we grade each other on how well we do on these. So if you talk to anyone at Cummins, when you get your performance review includes very tangible tactical work objectives, like, did you perform these tests the way you were supposed to? Did you deliver this new product program, but we also grade ourselves on how well we are as employees on living out the values of Cummins. Not a lot of companies actually put their performance in their performance review process, things like values, but we do. And I can tell you there are people at our company who've been very good at delivering the numbers year over year, but very poor at delivering the values, and they don't get to stay. So it's something that we take very seriously. And our CEO, he had some words to say about our leadership responsibility. But really for him and all of us on the team, it's all about how do we walk the talk behind our vision, our mission, and our values. So that's what I want to show you next. How have we done that? So I want to show you a couple pictures. So this first picture this is what the leadership team of Cummins looked like when I joined in 2000. Does anything stick out at you about that picture? A lot, yeah. You want to see what it looks like now? This is what it looks like now. You want me to flip back? Do the back and forth? It's pretty fascinating. It's pretty fascinating. And so one of the things that our CEO, he very clearly a couple years ago said, our job as a company, let's just stick with gender. He said, half of the people in the world are women. We ought to shoot for half of the people in our workforce at Cummins to be women. Why not, right? And as a result, he also said, for his leadership team, I want to get to a spot whereby, we've got more women leading the company. There were actually two, I don't know if you noticed, there were two in that picture. Can you find them? Yeah, they're hiding. Somebody pointed that out last time I did this talk. They're like, you're hiding the women. I'm like, oh gosh. Yes, but there are two. And not only do we have more women on our leadership team, our chief technical officer of Cummins is the first female CTO we've had in our company. And we have women in, I run a big business. We have women in business operating roles. We have women in functional roles and in technical roles. And this is a really important thing for our company. And we have people that look like the places in the world where we sell our products. That's the other thing that we've been working on. So we've got a lot of business in India. So we ought to have leaders in our company that are Indian, right? And so that's something else that we've been working through. So that's one example of kind of leadership team diversity. I also want to share with you something that we did last year. We had our first ever women's conference at Cummins. Now, I will tell you, you guys, we started our first affinity group, our first women's affinity group started, I think it was 2001. I was pretty new at the company, and I remember the kickoff. It had lots of fanfare. We were all very excited. And then not a lot happened. And the reason it took a while is we didn't have a lot of women in roles where they could actually lead through the vision of what we wanted to do. So we actually had to kind of cultivate some leadership to take on. And so it took us 16 years to get to a point where we could now actually have women's conferences, not just in Indiana, but around the world. Because in order to kind of show women the art of the possible in terms of leadership and what they can do, you kind of need women to be able to be there and role model that. And it took us 16 years. So I'm hopeful as we continue on our diversity journey, we can do things a little bit faster than that. But this was a huge milestone. There we had the North America Women's Conference. We also did one in South Africa. That's the picture at top. And then down below is the one we did in India. And we actually, I think, have 2 more slated this year in region to do. So this next one I want to talk to you about is an example of how Cummins used some changes in the marketplace, along with some decision making, strong decisions that we had to make where we relied on our core values to do what we thought was right in a very difficult situation. And it's all about some technical choices that we made. So So in 1990, here in the US, the Clean Air Act came to be. And so this was, this set a lot of things in motion in the commercial vehicle industry here in North America. And so Cummins, we've always been in a place where we get the ability to work with people like the EPA on these rules and policies to help form them in a way that we think is feasible to achieve the goal of the policy, but also realistic for manufacturers to roll out. And we thought that was important. But of course, when the rules came, a lot of the things that Cummins was advocating for didn't quite play out the way we had hoped. And what we saw was these rules would come in, it would increase costs for people that needed to purchase trucks. We were also concerned about reliability in terms of how these products would perform, because there's going to be technology on there that was new and different. And so what would happen as truck owners experience this technology? And it also, at the same time, fuel economy. We were struggling to meet the emissions and also achieve improved fuel economy. So that also is a cost driver for the people buying these trucks. So that was kind of the issue we were facing in 1990. Then 1998 happened, and what happened then was this thing called, we call it the consent decree. So what happened was EPA changed some things about the interpretation of the rule that we had all agreed to back in 1990, and they stated that engine manufacturers, they believed, had violated the spirit of the rule. And so what happened was everyone that manufactured these products had to pay a big fine and sign the consent decree, which said we're going to commit to reduce emissions even more by another 50%. And of course, nobody knew how to do this really at that point, but yet we had to agree to do it. And so what happened was the industry kind of split. So many engine manufacturers were lobbying and pushing hard against this. And Cummins leadership at that time, they met with the board and they said, you know what, right? Think about our values, think about what we've signed up to do to build a cleaner, healthier, safer environment. Think about our commitment to communities and improving communities. Even though we don't know what to do, maybe instead of fighting it, maybe we should get on board sooner and try and help shape it more as it goes forward, and then work like crazy to get the right technology solution in place. And so while the rest of the industry was lobbying Congress for delays and suing the EPA and all these crazy things, Cummins didn't do any of that. So we decided that we would go to EPA and say, how can we help? And what happened was we focused all of our company's efforts on developing technologies that would achieve these new standards, because that was what we were committed to do. It was in our values, even though we weren't sure. And you know what? We did it. So in 2002, we hit that milestone, and we were the first company to certify our engines to that standard. And at the same time, we developed a technology architecture that would allow us to meet 2007 and 2010 standards as well. So now we had a path forward, and we did it sooner than anyone else because we chose not to fight against it. And in fact, in 2007, we launched an engine on the Dodge Ram pickup truck that met 2010 emission standards 3 years early. And that provided significant advantage both to our customer and to Cummins as we went ahead through the remaining time horizon. So that was one kind of important journey in our history. So the other thing I want to talk about from a product perspective are some things that we've had to do from an innovation perspective to drive solutions around the world in a different way. Because remember, when I started at the company, we were a North American heavy-duty engine manufacturer. That was what we did. The components business that I lead now did not exist. Didn't exist. After treatment devices, didn't exist. And so one of the things that we did was we said, all right, we've got this goal where we've said cleaner, healthier, safer, better for our communities, provide jobs for our employees, make sure we understand the markets that we're operating and provide technology that works in those communities. So the first thing we did, as we were thinking about, this is a picture of an after-treatment device. We said, what do we do as emissions change in places like China and India? It's a very different environment than what we're used to in North America and Europe. So we focused on building capability to be able to build these products locally in places like China and India. And by the way, those designs don't look the same as they look in North America and Europe. And at the same time, we're providing lots of jobs for a lot of capable people because we're now manufacturing those pieces of hardware locally. Those jobs did not exist 17 years ago. The other thing we've done is this after treatment, we'll stay on that for a bit, as the markets like here in North America got used to having this technology now on the vehicle and on the engine, now we had a chance to innovate in a different way. Because everybody's now, our customers, they're used to it. You buy an engine and there's after treatment on it. It's pretty normal now. And we started this business up, actually. I worked in it when it was a startup. So it was about 2004, was it 2004? 3 and 4 is when we were starting this business up. And, we had big dreams and big goals, but, we didn't actually have a lot of time. And now that business, 2003 till now, that business is now about $2.5 billion in revenue. So that from 2003 to 2016, that's the amount of growth that business has seen. And that's going to continue as we continue to add these products in other regions. But in North America, now we're at a place, now that everyone's used to the technology, we said, what do we do next? So now we have this. We just launched this product this year. This is a single module design for after treatment. And this is one where it's 60% smaller and 40% lighter. And it takes up less space. It performs the same job as the last one. Actually, it performs it better. There's less parts that can break and go wrong. It's more reliable. And so this is kind of a new way for us to add value in a pretty mature market space. But it's, again, all around us trying to figure out what does that market need now that the product's at a different place. And it ensures that our engines remain compliant. So this is a picture of our engine. This is our ISG engine. I couldn't tell you what it stands for other than the marketing people told us that's our nomenclature. But it's an engine that we launched 2 years ago specifically for the China market, the heavy-duty truck market in China. And the unique thing about this engine is we decided that we would do the development work with local teams. And in fact, there were people from India, China, and the US that all worked on this product at the same time. And in the end, it meets China's requirements for that emissions hurdle, which were about the same as the standards in the US in 2002. But it's at 35% lower cost than the version we did in the US. And it's lighter and it's more fuel efficient than that same product would have been that we did in the US in 2002. So we took a lot of the things that we learned, and then we also understood what's going on in China and how do we bring those two things together to make a product that's targeted specifically for that market. And our customers gotten a lot of market share as a result of this product. This last thing is a picture of a turbocharger, but what you can't tell about this turbocharger is it's a remanufactured turbocharger. So what that is oftentimes in our system when people want to go buy parts from us, we often offer a solution that is something that we call it reman or remanufactured. So instead of it being brand new, same thing that goes in an engine on a factory, we have an operation where we can clean and basically bring the components of that turbocharger kind of to an as-new state and then remanufacture it and sell it to them for a lower cost. And so what we've learned is as we do remanufacturing operations, this one in particular, it requires 85% less energy to produce this turbocharger on average versus producing a new part. So it's actually it's kind of more sustainable for us from an operational perspective, and it's lower cost for our customers. So that's something that we look at. How do we do more of that? How do we remanufacture other components, other products in our portfolio over time? So those are some decisions that we made all around this environmental impact side, whether it's what's happening in the market or whether it's what we see from our operations. South Africa, this was a really interesting case. So you guys, in 1979, Cummins was a leading market player in South Africa. And the company was trying to decide, should we build a factory in South Africa as a result of the business that we had there, but we were very concerned about the discrimination and segregation that was happening there. So our position was we would build the factory, but our requirement was our factory must be integrated. The government said, no, you can't do that. So we had already talked to the board of directors and said, if we're not allowed to do that, then we will exit the South African market. So when the government said no, we said, fine, and we exited. And we lost share, we lost profits. Our competitors came in, but we knew that was what we had to do. It was very clear for us that we were not going to be able to operate in a place that was not going to allow our work environment to occur the way we needed it to. So that was a big decision that Cummins made in 1979. And that guy, Mr. Miller, I talked about, he was kind of part and parcel to that at that time. Nigeria, so we have a big area business organization in Africa. And Africa is, doing business in that continent is, exciting, crazy, fun, scary, all of those things. And one of the things that we've learned in Nigeria is we've actually had to take some pretty tough positions related to how we do business. Because oftentimes in our industry, there are people that are, their job is to help you do business. And basically you pay them to help you do business. You don't always know, though, how they're helping you. And that is a problem for Cummins. So we've decided that we will not pay bribes. We won't pay bribes, even if it's to keep people safe, or even if it's to get products and goods to certain places. And in Nigeria is a place where it's very difficult to do business. So we've had to be very selective about how we do business in Nigeria. It's gone a lot slower than we've planned, but we believe it's the right thing to do as that market begins to develop and become more mature. And that's a position that we've taken. And as we make investments in Africa, our board is totally supportive of us going at a slower pace so we can deal with things like that. This last one, this is a brand new thing, and we're really proud of this. We opened this building in January of this year. This is our distribution business, new headquarters. It's in Indianapolis. Natalie works in this building. She can tell you how fabulous it is. And there's about 400 employees that work in this building. And the reason I share it with you is, that comment that I said at the beginning about how we believe that there's this tie between strong businesses and strong communities. And so one of the things we believe then is we have a bunch of employees that are working in Indianapolis. We haven't really had a great space for them. And as we've done in Columbus over the years, we've invested in Columbus in a lot of design-related activity, not just for Cummins buildings, but for other public buildings. And we took the opportunity here to invest in a different way around creating an environment for our employees that had great design, but also created space for the community in Indianapolis. What you can't see on this rendering is there's this giant park that's part of this campus. And there's artwork in the building that if you're sitting in the park, you can actually look into the building and see these murals on the wall. And it's the first type of space that kind of brings the outside in and vice versa in Indianapolis. And so a lot of people in the city have been spending a lot of time learning about this and visiting this building, even though it's only been open for a couple of months. In fact, the Indy 500, when they unveiled the ticket for the Indy 500, this is a big deal every year when they do this, they did it in the lobby of that building. And it was, partly because of the investment that Cummins had made and our willingness to include the public in this space that's a private company space, or it's a public company space, but it's private for us, but they're invited in. And so the community is actually wanting to engage. So it's a pretty neat place to be. And apparently we have a lot of employees that want to work there now that's not their assigned location. But it's all about, our emphasis on good design, creating great space for our employees. So this just kind of tells you a lot of these things I talked about, where we've been from the early 2000s till now. So our company has changed. We are no longer just a North American heavy-duty truck engine manufacturing company. We no longer focus solely on engines. We focus now more on components around the engine, and we're starting to think about what happens in the next 30 years when we need to expand our thinking beyond just diesel engines. And we need to think about what happens when there's electric vehicles at play and natural gas, and what about solar? What does that do for our power generation business? So there's a lot of work happening now around what do we do to transform our company so we can actually get another 100 years out of Cummins. And we've done it a couple of times, and I think we'll continue to do it. And the reason I think we'll continue to do it is we will always keep those values that I talked about front and center to how we make decisions, because it served us quite well for the last 100 years, and I think it will continue to do so. So that was all I had, and I think we have time for questions now.
We'll go for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll summarize. I'll just probably let Tracy take over. I'm just going to start. I figured I'd ask the question, but there's already a hand up, so I'll let you go.
That was a great presentation and an even better message.
Thank you.
It was terrific.
Thank you.
Two questions. One, how does an organization like Cummins deal with the issue of once you've made it, it's hard to bring new technologies along that might disrupt that market? I'd be very interested in that. And then sort of to go along with that, could a company like Cummins start today in the environment that we have right now? Or was it unique for the time and for the values that were generated at its beginning?
So I'm horrible at remembering questions, so you might need to prompt me with your second one. But I'll start with the first one. We are, your first question was around kind of how are we planning to go forward as we see the technical challenges ahead of us? We are expanding our thinking on how we do our work. We realize that, well, we've got a lot of great base capability and a lot of, specific technologies related to the combustion process and air handling and all of these things, which we still need to know that. There's other things around software and controls that we've just started to really build up at a faster pace internally. And so we're doing a lot of things where we collaborate with different academic institutions. We're working with a group in California that's helping us think about how do we incubate maybe some smaller businesses that are a little bit outside of our core. We're also strategically looking at how do we selectively acquire possibly some companies that expand our thinking from just as, beyond an engine and engine components to maybe a powertrain level. And maybe, we even ask the questions in some regions, do we need to own vehicles? Do we need to go that far out? So we're actually, asking a lot of those questions, and strategically we'll be making some of those moves. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about some yet this year. So we've got those going on. Your second question around, could a company like Cummins start today? Probably, but I actually think part of what Cummins has done so well is we've actually made some mistakes along the way that we've learned a lot from. And the question is, can you afford to make those same mistakes today going forward? I feel like the world moves at a faster pace in terms of the cycles that we have to develop, and things are happening fast and products are being iterated that quickly. So I wonder if we have the luxury of time that maybe we would have had in the past. So that's the part where I say I don't know. But I do think, we were able to, despite some mistakes that we made along the way, find ways to recover because we always came back to what was core and important for us. Thanks for your questions. What else? There's one in back and then one up front here.
So my question is kind of on your regulatory portion of your talk. Given the current administration's stance on regulation, will Cummins continue to try and lead in protecting the environment, or are they going to maybe take some of those deregulatory stances and make some money?
We will continue to lead. We actually have a pretty active government relations team based in Washington, D.C. that spends a lot of time with members of Congress, in fact, trying to help them understand not just the business we're in, that they care about in their own home states, but also the implications for our country, whether it's from an environmental perspective, whether it's from a trade perspective, whether it's from a taxation perspective. But on the environmental side, our view is always going to be that we want to lead. Like, our vote is, we actually, if we would vote for tougher standards from an engine perspective if we could, right? If we would say bring it on. That's kind of the position that we take, and we will continue to take. But it is uncertain and complex.
Kind of building on that leadership, your story of diversity is obviously very inspiring. And you gave the example of your leadership team's change in diversity over the years. Can you speak to how your board of directors changed over the years in diversity, and in what sense did that potentially even impact some of the decisions they were called upon to make to uphold Mr. Miller's values, especially surrounding South Africa and Nigeria?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple interesting things about our board. So actually, one of our board members is still in the family. We have a guy named Will Miller. So his dad was the guy I talked about. So Will has, I think Will kind of keeps some of those threads alive, but he really doesn't need to work too hard at it because, our current CEO, he had the opportunity to work for Mr. Miller. And so there's kind of, I think I'm probably, Jennifer Rumsey, the CTO, and we're probably the two people on the leadership team we're probably the youngest. And I think we kind of missed not being able to work with him. I think we're the two who didn't. But everyone else has had a chance to work with him. So that's kind of how that stays fresh. The other thing about our board is we actually have 2 female directors on our board. And we have one board of director. One of them, he's from Costa Rica. We have I want to say he's not Italian, but he's Latin American. We have another one of our board directors, an African American. So we've got a lot of visible diversity on our board. And I will tell you that they push us very hard, very, very hard. For me, in fact, the female board directors that we have, they're quite active. They want to know and get to know the female leaders in our company. So, even before I got to be an officer of the company, one of our board members, she actually reached out to me and wanted to talk to me, which was a little freaky. I was like, what does she want? But it just kind of shows our board's commitment to getting to know talent in the company and trying to understand, what it's like for our talent, especially talent that they're, that management's investing in. So I was really inspired by that, and that kind of gave me the push to say, oh yeah, I can keep going and do this. So that's kind of how they do it. Thanks. Got both sides.
Hi.
Hi.
So, as you can probably tell by looking around, there aren't very many women in engineering or any STEM field. So, as a very large employer of engineers, what can Cummins and what can companies like Cummins do to try to encourage more people to enter the field, let alone hiring them when they get there?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we've done in India is we actually have a Cummins College of Engineering for Women in India because we saw that there was a definite pipeline problem for getting better gender balance in our workforce in India. And we knew that we were going to grow a lot in India, and we were really concerned about what happens if, you only get 50% of the available population, accessible in your technical ranks. So that's one of the things that we did a long time ago. And not every woman that goes to college there comes and works at Cummins, but enough do, and enough, there is enough kind of connection back to the company. And what that's done is it's actually signaled in a region of the world how serious Cummins is about, in this case, gender diversity, in a place that, by the way, isn't very female friendly. So that's one example of something that we do. And we also spend a lot of time with certain educational institutions trying to understand, what are the barriers for women in engineering? How do we ensure we've got flexible policies? How do we make sure we have enough female role models for people in leadership positions that they can actually kind of talk to about what it's like to go through and be in an industry where there aren't very many people that look like you? I think the fact that our CTO is a female is a pretty awesome thing. And I think that I'm hopeful that maybe some other companies in the industrial space might follow suit. And I can tell you that one of the things that I like to do when I go meet with customers in Europe, I put up my organization chart. I actually, of the 4 businesses that are under me, 2 of the general managers, I have 2 female general managers, which is, I don't think it's unusual, but apparently it is, because the Europeans, when they see it, they want to talk to me about, like, how did you do that? And I'm like, well, I hired them. That's how I did it, right? It's not that hard. So I actually like to show people kind of what it looks like, and I like it when they ask me those questions. So that's some of the stuff we do. Thanks.
Well, thank you for the talk, first of all. But being a leader yourself, what advice can you give the young leaders in the audience here?
Yeah, so now I got this question earlier today, so those of you that were there, you have to make sure I'm consistent. I kind of remind people, always keep learning. The more inquisitive you are, and the more that you continue to keep your mind open about learning, I think that's the very best thing you can do. And I also tell people, especially when I talk to a lot of women that are in the field, I tell them, assume positive intent. When something happens or someone says something to you that just you think, did they really just say that? Assume they said it because they just didn't know any better. So, because it happens, people make mistakes, and remember, the way you learn is you make mistakes. So even sometimes in behavioral cultural situations, if I see that someone made a mistake, I have to assume goodness, and then maybe I can help teach them so they don't make that same mistake again later. So kind of assuming positive intent is another big one, along with the learning, the inquiring, and I always tell people, just be confident in your abilities. If you do those other things and then you're confident in your abilities, you're going to be okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Well, join me in thanking Tracy for a great talk. And thanks for coming. We'll be here for a few more minutes, and then we'll be off to another.